Good Monday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now. Not over yet. As we begin this Monday, Tropical Depression Henri remains stuck over a soaked northeast, with more heavy rain expected throughout the day from New Jersey to New Hampshire, as hundreds of thousands of Americans reel from power outages and widespread flooding. Bill Cairns has the latest on the path. Flights to safety as evacuations continue this morning in an embattled Afghanistan. The Pentagon is now ordering U.S. commercial airlines to transport refugees once they've left the country. This as President Biden defends the ongoing rescue operation.
At the end of the day, if we didn't leave Afghanistan now, when do we leave? Another 10 years? Another 5 years?
We'll dig into our new numbers on the president's approval rating following his response in Afghanistan, its lowest since taking office. Boosting the shot, a major development on the COVID front this morning. The FDA could grant full approval to Pfizer's vaccine as early as today. But will that coax unvaccinated Americans into getting their shots? This as hospitals and healthcare workers in the hard-hit South remain on the brink and kids head back to school. And tough questions this morning. Who will be the next host of Jeopardy? Mike Richards, the show's executive producer and named successor to Alex Trebek, now stepping down following fresh scrutiny of offensive comments he's made in the past. His statement and the future of America's top game show. And we start this morning with Tropical Depression Henri impacting tens of millions of Americans in the Northeast.
Weakened from a Category 1 hurricane to a tropical storm yesterday, just before making landfall in Rhode Island. Coastal residents were bracing for storm surge, but it's really torrential rains that caused most of the flooding headaches. Even before the storm hit, emergency crews rescued stranded drivers from flooded cars in New York City. Across New England, the storm knocked out power to more than 120,000 homes. A majority of them are in Rhode Island. The catastrophic rain isn't over for the Northeast. Forecasters are warning of a risk for excessive rainfall as Henri plows over Connecticut and Massachusetts. The storm has dumped nearly a foot of rain in parts of New Jersey and New York already. Flash flood warnings are in effect for much of the Northeast as the storm meanders eastward. Flooding is even more of a risk because remnants of Fred soaked the region last week. But for some of Connecticut, as you can see, this storm brought an opportunity for reprieve. This guy is making the most of the water-soaked roadway. A skimboarder turned a flooded street into a water park. The image capped off by emergency vehicles in the background.
Here to cover Henri, where it's been, what it's doing, and where it's going today, NBC News correspondents Kristen Dahlgren, who's just south of Hartford, Connecticut, and Kathy Park in Narragansett, Rhode Island.
Kristen, we'll start with you. The rain has been falling on Connecticut seemingly all weekend. Isn't really stopping today. How has the state been impacted by the storm so far?
Right. Good morning, Joe. So I kind of have a two-part answer because take a look this morning. It's actually quite lovely out here. We've got the sun shining in places. It's a calm morning and a little bit of a sigh of relief for some people in Connecticut that they didn't bear the brunt of the storm yesterday. There are some power outages, some trees down, things like that, but really a sense that things could have been much worse. But that said, we still need to get through today. And so Henri is now a subtropical low. And all that moisture that's now coming down over places like Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey is going to shift and come back across Connecticut. And that's where we could have some problems because, like you said, raining all weekend and a really rainy summer. So we've got a saturated ground here in Connecticut. We're going to be adding potentially several inches on top of that. And so while the flood watches for now have been discontinued, they are expected to be back up later on today. And the fear of some flash flooding as Henri, or what's left of it, comes back across the state, guys.
And Kathy, Henri is now a tropical depression, but it had made landfall as a tropical storm in Rhode Island, where you are now. What have you seen on the ground?
Hey, Savannah, good morning to you. Yeah, it is a muggy and foggy start to the day. And as you mentioned, Henri weakened as it made landfall, but it did pack quite a punch. You can probably see behind me this massive tree that toppled at the height of the storm, and you can probably also hear the generators humming in the background. So tens of thousands of customers here in Rhode Island are waking up in the dark this morning, and we're told that it could be several days before the power is restored. But obviously, crews are working just around the clock to get people back online. As the storm eventually moved into this area, there were extremely intense wind gusts. We were feeling it on the beach. We saw waves crashing onto the shore. But the wind was really the big headline. And obviously, the ground was so saturated from past storms. So that's why these trees really stood no chance. And they toppled not only onto power lines, but onto homes as well. But fortunately, we're not hearing any reports of injuries at this time.
Yeah, that is great news. And Kristen, how are state leaders gearing up for potentially more rain, potential flooding happening today?
Right, Savannah. They just want to let people know that there is still a danger, that you can't really assume that since we went through yesterday and they made it fine, that today will be the same. And so the lieutenant governor planning on having a press conference later on this morning at about 10:30 to let people know that there is still the potential for big impacts. And because flash flooding is going to be something that they're watching, they do have these swift water rescue teams that are at the ready to go into places where there might be high water, where people may need to be rescued. Yesterday, there were a few rescues in one town. They had about 18 calls because the water was coming in and people needed to get out of their homes into safety. Today, again, we could see a lot of the same things.
Kathy, one of the biggest impacts of this storm is power outages, most of them in Rhode Island. How soon could most residents get their power back?
So, Joe, there was a press conference yesterday with some of the utility crews, and they're saying it could be potentially by midweek. Right now, at last check, the outages are in the tens of thousands. You know what? The numbers, obviously not good to hear that people are still in the dark this morning, but people were anticipating the storm to be a lot stronger. They were anticipating even more outages, but it looks like it could be a couple of days before everyone is back online.
All right, Kristen Dahlgren and Kathy Park, thank you both so much for kicking us off this morning. We appreciate your reporting.
A state of emergency has been declared in Tennessee after deadly flash flooding swept parts of the state. At least 21 people are dead and 20 are missing after historic rainfall inundated Middle Tennessee. All but one of those deaths happened in the city of Waverly, just 75 miles west of Nashville. The National Guard is conducting search and recovery efforts. The director of Tennessee's Emergency Management Agency says those efforts will continue until every person is accounted for. 14.5 inches of rain fell between Friday and Saturday. That could increase to 17 inches when more data rolls in. And if that happens, it would beat rainfall records set in parts of the state back in 1982.
In Afghanistan this morning, the German military says a firefight broke out at Kabul airport between Afghan security forces and a group of unidentified men. A tweet from its official account, the German military said one Afghan guard was killed. 3 others were injured.
Yeah, this comes after President Biden said the U.S. is taking steps to ramp up evacuation efforts and again defended his decision to withdraw American troops.
The evacuation of thousands of people from Kabul is going to be hard and painful, no matter when it started, when we began. It would have been true if we had started a month ago or a month from now. There is no way to evacuate this many people without pain and loss of heartbreaking images you see on television. It's just a fact.
Joining us now to talk more about this, we've got Ali Arouzi in Tehran and Mike Memoli at the White House. Ali, we'll start with you. What more can you tell us about this deadly firefight at Kabul airport, and just what is the latest on the ground there?
Good morning, Joe. Well, the German military reported that in the early hours of this morning, a gun battle broke out between Afghan security forces and unknown attackers at the north gate of Kabul airport. An Afghan security force was killed and 3 others wounded. The German army added that the Americans and German forces were also involved in further battles that ensued, but there are no reports of U.S. or German military personnel being injured. And despite all this danger and volatility Panicked and desperate people continue to gather at the gates of Kabul airport under treacherous circumstances. There was a stampede there yesterday, which the British Army said cost the lives of 7 Afghans who were crushed to death. Amongst them, tragically, a 2-year-old girl, just underscoring how dangerous it is for people there still trying to flee the Taliban. And we've also learned that there's a very specific threat from ISIS-KP, that's the Afghanistan branch of ISIS, against Americans and others at the airport trying to get out of Kabul.
And Mike, let's bring you in here. Last night, the president again defended his actions in Afghanistan. We just played a little bit of that there. Tell us more about what he said. And the big question, could the U.S. extend that August 31st withdrawal deadline?
Well, Savannah, remember, this is a president who's supposed to be on something of a vacation these last 2 weeks. Not only did he not head home to Delaware for the past week, he was delivering rare Sunday remarks from the White House, giving that update on the pace of evacuations from Afghanistan, also addressing the flash flooding and the tropical storm that you were just talking about. But as you mentioned, the big question, as there are still tens of thousands of Americans and even more Afghans looking to exit the country, will the U.S. extend that August 31st deadline? The president indicating that negotiations are still underway. Take a listen.
There's discussions going on among us and the military about extending. Our hope is we will not have to extend, but there are going to be discussions, I suspect, on how far along we are in the process.
Now, Savannah, I mentioned the pace of evacuations. It's picked up dramatically overnight. We just got, in the last few minutes, some updated numbers from the White House. Let me read them to you. 28 military flights left Kabul in the last 24 hours, evacuating more than 10,400 passengers. That's a significant pickup of the pace we'd seen. The president also indicating in those remarks yesterday that there have been some operations beyond trying to just get people to the airport from that main road in Kabul, but he did not want to specify the nature of those efforts underway, obviously to protect the operational security involved.
So, Ali, if the U.S. does want to go past that August 31st deadline, do we know, is the Taliban likely to accept an extension of that deadline?
Joe, it would seem unlikely. They're already blaming the U.S. for deliberately engineering a disaster at the airport to deflect from what they call a U.S. defeat in Afghanistan. The Taliban are also very keen for the U.S. to fully exit the country so they can run things the way they want without the risk of any sort of reprisal from the U.S. due to some sort of unforeseen circumstances. Look, the Taliban are stretched thin. Many of their fighters are very violent, and they may get into some sort of spontaneous clash with U.S. troops or hurt or kill U.S. civilians, which would mean the U.S. would then have to get into a fight with them, and that's not what the Taliban want right now. They're also the heightened threat of IS-KP, who are not taking orders from the Taliban. If they were to strike, that would complicate matters on the ground. Reuters this morning was reporting that a senior Taliban official had ruled out any possible extension. So even if the U.S. wanted to stay beyond August 31st, the forces opposed to them on the ground would probably make life even more difficult than it is now.
And now, Mike, NBC News released a new set of polls over the weekend. It shows the president's approval rating dropping. It's now below 50%, and that seems to be, at least in part, a reaction to what we're seeing in Afghanistan. What kind of message are Americans sending the president?
Well, this is certainly not the only foreign policy crisis that President Biden has faced since his inauguration in January, but it certainly is the most significant, and it is taking a real impact on his approval rating. Under 50% now for the first time, as you mentioned. Only 25% of respondents in this survey saying they approve of his handling of that evacuation effort underway now. Significantly, though, the president said yesterday, really brushed off these poll numbers, saying it's my judgment to make the hard calls here that others haven't made. He's confident that history will judge him on the right side. And another interesting number from that poll, 61% of Americans surveyed say that this 20-year effort in Afghanistan was not worth it. The president ultimately believes that that will validate his decision here. The idea that, as he said yesterday, once again, he was not willing to send Americans' sons or daughters back over there without our national interests clearly at stake.
All right, Mike and Ali, thank you both for your reporting this morning. Appreciate it.
For many refugees fleeing Afghanistan, the U.S. military base in Ramstein, Germany, is the first stop. The base is providing temporary lodging for evacuees as they prepare to relocate to the U.S. A spokesperson for the facility told NBC News on Sunday that 6,100 people have been flown in, with more expected in the coming days. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley is there for us now, and he joins us on the phone. Hi, Matt. Good morning. I hope you can hear me. So, Matt, obviously, it's a difficult and traumatizing experience for refugees to be fleeing Afghanistan. We're seeing these scenes at the airport that are traumatizing enough. What are the conditions like over there once they get there? What do they have to go through when they arrive?
Yeah, Savannah, I can hear you. And actually, the conditions that I saw were not totally bad. The fact is that a lot of these evacuees, they saw this as an improvement because, remember, they had gone through a gauntlet in order to get just here, not even to the United States. They had to go first through Taliban checkpoints in order to get to the airport. They had to, once they were in the airport, some of them told me that they spent as long as 3 days waiting to get out of Kabul. And that was 3 days spent with families, small children, sleeping on concrete tarmacs. And that was basically sleeping amongst trash. And we've seen a lot of images of that. Some of this posted on social media. Now they were then sent to Doha, to a sprawling base, Al Udeid, outside of Doha in Qatar. And then a lot of them that I spoke with here at the Ramstein Air Base said that they had arrived yesterday in a huge airlift, and their conditions have improved. But many of them are anxious, and a lot of them are very, very angry. They're waiting for some kind of word because essentially they've got no information about when they might be processed. Now, the U.S. authorities are saying that this information will be forthcoming, but so far, out of Ramstein Air Base, there's only been one flight that has actually taken off and gone to the United States. So that's a big problem. It's a massive backlog. The military said that they're hoping to keep people at Ramstein for only 42 to 72 hours. But beyond that, they're really going to cap it at 10 days. But they are building more and more tents, more and more facilities. It's clear that the U.S. military is expecting a huge population here at Ramstein.
So, Matt, you say the hope is 42 to 72 hours, a cap of 10 days, but kind of walk us through then what happens next. I mean, of course, there's a lot of unknowns here in terms of how long they'll actually be there at Ramstein, but where do they go? When do they go? What's the process like once they're here?
Yeah, that's the problem. Nobody really knows. I mean, I think when we weren't even told where in the United States they would be lifted to, it seems as though a lot have gone to Texas or Dulles Airport in Virginia outside Washington, D.C., but the officials that we spoke with, the U.S. officials, were unable to say with any clarity where a lot of these evacuees were going to be going. The backlog is in the processing, in the diplomacy, in basically certifying that these people are either U.S. citizens or that they're something called legal permanent residents. That's basically just green card holders. And a lot of the people that we spoke with in the camp at Ramstein, they were able to show their U.S. passports. These are Americans. They are of Afghan nationality, but they are American. And that's one of the reasons why they feel so betrayed and so angry, because they are U.S. citizens. Even those who are not fully U.S. citizens, a lot of them told me that they had spent some time in the U.S. One young man said that he was a legal permanent resident. He had lived in California for 10 years working as an engineer. So for these people, this delay, this constant need to just sort of stay outside the system, and really the lack of information, that's the real problem. It's causing them to feel extremely embittered toward their future home, the United States.
All right, Matt, thank you so much for your reporting.
The FDA could give Pfizer's coronavirus vaccine full approval as early as today. The New York Times is reporting that the FDA moved up its timeline for the review and approval process. The approval would pave the way for more companies to issue vaccine mandates and could boost confidence in the vaccine, motivating those who've been hesitant so far to get the shot. It's something doctors in Kentucky say the state really needs right now. Daily case numbers are at their highest since January. More than 3,000 people testing positive a day. Hospitals there are already short-staffed, now feeling the impact of this new wave. NBC News correspondent Cal Perry joins us now from the Hazard Regional Medical Center in Hazard, which is in eastern Kentucky. So, Cal, these past few weeks, we've been hearing from hospitals all across the South painting a dire picture. What's the current situation at this hospital you're at?
Yeah, it is full. It was full on Friday, full over the weekend. We will get an update this morning. The bigger story really of these 13 facilities in the Appalachian Healthcare Facility, all 32 of the ICU beds are full. So patients are being sent other places. The system itself, and this is very important if you live in the area, is reaching a breaking point. If you listen to the chief medical officer, she will explain why that is and how serious the situation is. Take a listen.
We are knocking on the door of being overwhelmed, and that's why I'm concerned about the potential escalation. You know, we had the summertime where we were experiencing such low levels of COVID that I think many of us had hoped that we had come to the end of the pandemic. And as it hit us again and hit us so rapidly that it really has been difficult and challenging.
Now, the state is at a 13% positivity rate. That is exceptionally high. You add to that, they are talking about a triage system in these hospitals where they will treat the people who need it the most, sending some away. So when you talk about the unvaccinated and this being a pandemic for the unvaccinated, that's really not true anymore, especially in eastern Kentucky and southern West Virginia. If you have an accident or a broken bone, you could wait to be treated because these hospitals are just simply full now, Joe.
Now, Cal, this hospital you're at is part of a larger healthcare system in the state. It recently implemented a vaccine mandate for staff. That's actually caused some workers to leave their jobs. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, 13 hospitals in this system, the Appalachian Healthcare System. There are 6,000 employees, as you said, mandated vaccinations if you want to work in this system. And some people, we don't have an accurate number on that yet, some people have said no, they're not going to get vaccinated. They have headed home. Add to that, there is a staffing shortage in general across the country. Add to that, if you are exposed to the virus and you haven't been fully vaccinated, this is gotten both of those vaccinations, you are sent home. So the staffing shortage is causing a problem. When you take those 32 ICU beds, for example, that is kind of the maximum amount of beds that they will have at this point because of the staffing shortage, Joe.
All right, Cal Perry reporting from Hazard, Kentucky. Cal, thank you.
NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar joins us now. Dr. Azar, good morning. So let's talk about this potential full authorization, something that could potentially help vaccination numbers in places like Kentucky. This report says from the New York Times that the FDA might give this full approval to Pfizer's vaccine today. So first, can you just tell us what that review process is like?
Sure. Yeah. You know, I think we've all been waiting anxiously for the last couple of months to get this approval, under our belts, because really what the FDA requires for an EUA is basically a 2-month extension following the completion of a clinical trial, which we achieved back in December. So in May, when they, applied for the full approval, I think we were expecting to see it really earlier in the summer. And I think that had a few skeptics sort of scratching their heads saying, is there anything else that, the FDA has uncovered or is concerned about that is delaying this approval? But needless to say, I think that, I think they were just making sure that all T's were crossed and all I's were dotted to get to this point. And I think as you've heard and as we've been reporting on, I think this is going to really trigger a lot of potential mandates, both within, businesses as well as hospital systems and schools and universities in the next couple of weeks, Savannah.
And so, Dr. Azar, right now, kids 12 and up can get the Pfizer vaccine. So does full approval impact at all the process to get kids younger than 12 vaccinated? Could that be sped up? When do you think that'll happen?
I think it does in a sense, but clearly they're both independent processes and they're happening in parallel. When you listen into the ACIP, the advisory committee of the CDC, and their deliberations when it comes to vaccine approval for children, it really is a very different process than it is with adults. Number one, there's all what are called de-escalation trials. So they do multiple different dosing strategies to see which one achieves the optimal immune response in children, and safety, of course, as it is with adults, but with children is even more important and even more of a concern, and even more philosophical discussions about mandating vaccines for children. It's very different than for adults, Savannah. So, I do think this is a little bit of this is certainly encouraging, and I think it green lights the whole process, but it's not going to expedite any of the science and the rigorous, study of the trials in children. I think that's going to happen. It is happening as we speak, and I think we're going to be getting that data early in the fall, and hopefully that will lead to an expansion of the authorization for children under 12.
And Dr. Azar, what about Moderna and Johnson & Johnson, those vaccines? When do you think the FDA will review those for full approval?
In the next couple of weeks. I mean, I think as we've seen from the beginning, Moderna has always been a few weeks behind Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson was approved in March, which was just a few months after the mRNA vaccines. And all of their trials are happening as we speak. Moderna is also going to be putting in for their booster, I believe, in September. And for Johnson & Johnson, we're really waiting to hear on their 2-dose versus 1-dose trial that should be completed by the end of this month to see whether or not they recommend a booster in individuals who receive the Johnson & Johnson.
All right, Dr. Natalie Azar, lots of clarity there. Thank you so much. And coming up, Gen Z Afghan influencers are using their unique social platform to keep the world's eyes on a country in crisis. Their emotional messages posted to TikTok. Up next. In the week since the Taliban took Kabul, people around the world have taken to social media to call attention to the humanitarian crisis unfolding. That includes Gen Z Afghan influencers posting videos to TikTok, some of which have gotten millions of views. NBCNews.com reporter Callan Rosenblatt joins us now. Callan, good morning. This is some fascinating reporting. So I know you spoke to several influencers who had moved to the U.S. to escape the Taliban when they were younger. So just first, what did they tell you about that experience?
The experiences they described to me were incredibly harrowing. One woman described moving from Afghanistan, then to Pakistan, then to the United States as a teenager in order to escape an arranged marriage to a member of the Taliban. Another young woman told me about a time her mother was attacked by a member of the Taliban. That young woman's name is Crystal, and we actually have a clip of her describing that experience here.
I vividly remember one scene. We were trying to go to Kabul, which was the main city, and that's where all the flights took off. And I remember I was with my mom, it was me, my mom, my sister, and just so many women were trying to get on the bus that would take you. And my mom just got beaten up, and she had like these gowns that we would wear. And I hid underneath her gown because I was so scared that I was going to get hit, which, I mean, it's just surreal thinking about stuff like that. And even that as a kid, I was 5 years old back then. I wasn't even able to take in the full scene and the true intensity of it.
And it's not just Crystal who is watching this with absolute horror. It's a bunch of young women who are really having a hard time watching from the United States the terror and the horror of what is going on in Afghanistan. It's absolutely been a heartbreaking watch for them. And this is another young woman, Aisha, who described her experience watching what's unfolding from the United States.
Mentally and emotionally, I'm so tired of watching the news. It's really awful. So Kabul was our last hope for all Afghans, but the Taliban took over, and which means the people that they worked hard for everything the last 20 years and achieved everything, they lose them all. They lose their houses and their family members and everything. So it's really awful. And especially when it comes to Afghanistan, the world is like really silent about it. And
these young women are using their social media platforms to encourage their followers not only to follow what's going on in Afghanistan, but to also make a change. They're hoping that young women and young men across the country will share charities, that they will share images, and that they will also contact their members of Congress. One young woman, Zara, who is a very popular TikTok influencer who has 3.1 million followers, actually showed a demo of how to call your Congress member and encourage them to take in more refugees. And that is right now what young Afghan American influencers are doing to help the people who are back home in Afghanistan.
All right, Callan, fascinating reporting. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's look at what else is making news around the world this morning. NBC News correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer joins us. Hey, Janice.
Hey, good morning. In Afghanistan, there are reports that the Taliban is apparently going to refuse the idea of having American and foreign forces in the country beyond August 31st. These are not official reports. These are coming through local media. Staying longer was something that was floated by President Biden as the U.S. continues to pick up the pace of evacuations from Kabul airport. It's still chaotic there. There were reports of a gun battle there earlier today, though President Biden did say that for the most part, the Taliban is roughly sticking to its promise of allowing Americans and other Afghans safe passage to the airport. In COVID news, Taiwan is rolling out its own homegrown vaccine today, but there is a lot of criticism that it was rushed through approvals. Leader Tsai Ing-wen was the first to get a dose of Medigen. It has yet to get through phase 3 clinical trials, but there are still 700,000 people who are signed up to get the vaccine. Meanwhile, in New Zealand, that lockdown over one single COVID case has been extended because the outbreak has grown to more than 100 cases. People, of course, not happy about the lockdown, but the country's prime minister said that the Delta variant is, quote, changing the rules of the game. And finally, do you remember that cargo ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal? Well, the Ever Given is giving it another try. It's going to make another go through the canal. The 1,300-foot-long vessel was stuck for about a week last March. It caused a global disruption of trade, and there was a huge backlog of ships. This time it had 2 tugboats helping it through, and it's now heading toward Qingdao, China, where it will undergo some repairs. And that's a look at your world today.
All right, Janice, thank you so much. And coming up, a spike in highway deaths in 2020, and the pandemic is to blame. With very little congestion and a lack of law enforcement, we'll take a look at reckless driving in the age of COVID up next. Welcome back. American-born singer and dancer Josephine Baker is set to be the first Black woman to be given France's highest honor. When Baker died in 1975, she was buried in Monaco, but a French newspaper is now reporting that Baker will be reinterred on November 30th at the Pantheon Monument in Paris in recognition of her work with the French resistance during World War II. Baker will be just the 5th woman and the first entertainer to receive the honor. That's pretty neat. Now, more Americans are driving recklessly, speeding on less congested highways since the pandemic began, and officers say the result has been deadly. NBC News correspondent Jacob Soboroff has more on the rising trend.
As the pandemic emptied out city streets, drivers took to the open roads at blazing speeds. Fred Ashmore set a record for the fastest solo drive from New York to California last year, topping out at 159 miles an hour.
You drove from New York to Los Angeles in 26 hours?
Actually, it was a little less than 26 hours. It was 25 hours and 55 minutes, but who's counting?
And all across the country, no signs of slowing down. From Texas to New York, and in Nebraska, where state troopers saw an over 70% increase in speeding since the pandemic began.
As drivers, we're so used to being in areas that are congested, and then all of a sudden when we're able to go fast, we're like, oh wow, I'm going to really put the pedal to the metal because there's no one around.
Making 2020 one of the deadliest on the roads. Highway deaths were the greatest in more than a decade, up 11% from the year before. But experts say it's all preventable.
This isn't a mystery. We already have a vaccine. It's slow down. It's wear your seatbelt. Don't drink and drive.
At the beginning of the pandemic, it was no secret that people were driving a little faster than normal on the freeways when they were wide open. The question is, are they still? And there's really only one way to find out. Can I borrow that? Is that all right?
Oh, yes. Here you go, sir.
With this thing. He's still going 81 even after he slowed down.
California Highway Patrol issued more than double the number of tickets this year alone to drivers going over 100 miles per hour compared to pre-pandemic levels.
Are you still seeing more people than normal
Absolutely.
At higher speeds?
Absolutely. You have a 5-lane freeway wide open. People are going in excess 80, 90, 100 miles an hour.
And experts fear pandemic speeding may be here to stay.
The longer this pandemic goes and the longer we don't have as much traffic enforcement that we need, this becomes our new normal.
Drivers putting the pedal to the metal with deadly consequences. Jacob Soboroff, NBC News, Los Angeles.
79 for that Escalade.
Coming up, while billions were allocated to Amtrak in Congress's infrastructure deal, the idea of a comprehensive high-speed rail system may never happen. We'll explain coming up next. High-speed rail promises both faster travel and a smaller carbon footprint, which is why the Biden administration wants to build a system like the ones in Europe and Asia. But could potential battles with private landowners put the brakes on those plans? NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman has more.
America has been talking about high-speed rails since 1965, shortly after Japan introduced its first line. Sleek bullet trains whisking commuters, families, and travelers between cities faster than a car and cheaper than flying. The American dream of high-speed rail looks like the systems across Europe, Japan, and China, where super-fast trains connect Beijing to Shanghai, roughly 900 miles apart. That's similar to the distance between Chicago and New York, which takes 21 to 22 hours on Amtrak. But the Beijing-Shanghai train does it in 4 hours and 18 minutes.
I do think that high-speed rail is important with the way the U.S. is laid out.
Amtrak's Acela from D.C. to Boston is America's first and only operational high-speed rail. It hits top speeds of 135 miles per hour, but it breaks down to about 62 miles per hour for most of the 7-hour journey, making it feel more like a regular train. There are also 2 other projects under construction in California and Florida, and another under contract in Texas. These projects, along with the Biden administration's historic investment in passenger rail in the infrastructure bill, provide a beacon of hope for the country's high-speed rail ambitions. But here's why those dreams will likely not materialize anytime soon. Building new railroad tracks is no easy feat.
Getting the property rights for a straight path between point A and point B is really difficult.
Texas Central, the private development company leading the Dallas to Houston high-speed rail project, is dealing with pressure from critics who say their plans will abuse eminent domain. On its website, Texas Central says it will minimize disruptions to landowners and negotiate fairly in accordance with all Texas laws.
We've made it incredibly difficult to sign off enough paperwork, to get the right workers at the site, and to get everybody to agree on what needs to happen. If we can't cut through this bureaucracy, we'll never get the rail improvements that we need in this country.
The privately funded rail company Brightline Trains is building the high-speed rail system that will connect Orlando and South Florida, with an estimated completion date of late 2022. It hasn't been a smooth ride, though. The company dealt with a 2-year, multi-million-dollar legal battle to get approval for just one of its environmental permits for only one portion of the 170-mile project. The ease and flexibility of driving also make it harder for high-speed rail to compete in the U.S.
Driving makes a lot of sense. Even though it takes more time, it can be a lot less hassle and certainly cost way less money. At the end of the day, the car just ends up being, for most people, their first thought and often the most convenient option for them.
Hefty price tags also play a role in high-speed rail construction.
California's high-speed rail has spent billions of dollars without a single train leaving the station.
California announced its initial business plan for the 670-mile high-speed rail from San Francisco to Los Angeles in 2000, more than 2 decades ago. Estimated price, $25 billion, including an extension to San Diego. Construction didn't kick off till 2015. Now, the total cost is edging close to $100 billion. The first phase was initially planned to start carrying passengers in 2025, but that's been pushed back till 2029. There's $66 billion dedicated to passenger rail in the infrastructure bill, the largest investment in rail since Amtrak started more than 50 years ago. But only $12 billion of the investment is for high-speed rail.
This is really about the entire Northeast corridor.
Will it be enough to get us to a national network of high-speed rail like some other countries have or are working on? No, this initial investment will not be enough to get us all the way there.
Time now for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
CNBC's Contessa Brewer is with us this morning. Hey, Contessa, good morning.
Good morning, Savannah, and good morning, Joe. General Motors is expanding a recall to include all Chevy Bolt models sold worldwide to fix a battery problem that could cause fires. This new recall adds about 73,000 Bolts from 2019 to 2022 model years. That's on top of a previous recall of 69,000 vehicles made from 2017 to 2019. And the latest recall will cost GM about $1 billion. The company says owners should limit charging to 90% of capacity and park their vehicles outdoors until they can replace that battery. Restaurants, of course, have been replacing physical menus with QR codes during the pandemic, a change that industry insiders say is likely permanent. Bitly, a link management service, says QR code downloads have soared 750% over the past 18 months. Restaurants realize how valuable the technology is beyond the contactless service. Experts also see ways the codes could be used, like keeping track of customer data and past orders or changing pricing on the fly. Powerball is adding another chance to win cash with a new Monday drawing that starts tonight, in addition to Wednesday and Saturday. Unfortunately, this third drawing will not increase your odds of winning, but it is expected to result in larger and faster growing jackpots. Ticket sales will help fund public programs in each state where they're sold. Powerball has raised as much as $25 billion for state causes since 1992. I mean, I only play when the jackpots are super big because I figure why not?
Yeah.
And at that
only
point,
get in on
$2 seems worth it, guys.
Exactly. I only get in on office pools because I don't want to be left out.
Yeah, and then you're like, what am I going to do if they all win and get out of here?
Bye. All right.
But really, what do we think $50 million is not enough for us to win? Now we need $450 million.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
We have high standards here, Contessa. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
There was no shortage of news this weekend, from the withdrawal of troops in Afghanistan to the latest guidance on school reopenings as the Delta variant surges. All of it was covered on Meet the Press. Moderator Chuck Todd has the highlights.
Good morning. On this week's Meet the Press, our focus stays on the chaos in Afghanistan. I talked to the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, plus Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Also on the docket was school and COVID. I had an exclusive interview with the Education Secretary, Miguel Cardona. Here are some of the most important answers from Meet the Press, compressed.
I know that the scenes around the airport are heartbreaking, large crowds of people wanting to leave. I know that there is complexity and there is turbulence on the ground in Kabul, and it's very risky and dangerous because there's a genuine threat from ISIS-K. That is the reality of what we are up against, and I'm not going to sugarcoat that reality. No plan survives first contact with reality. No plan can account for every contingency that occurs at a tactical level on a day-to-day basis. What you do is you adjust, and we've adjusted. And while we are continuing to face genuine challenges, we believe we are making progress.
There's no question that there were mistakes, there were strategies that were pursued that didn't work, strategies that were pursued that didn't have the resources they needed. But for the United States to be in a position where we need to ensure Afghanistan is not a safe haven, that means that we've got to provide the support necessary to continue to have the Afghans bear the brunt of the fight. So this isn't about building, a democracy that looks like the United States. It's about what can we do to maintain stability so that we don't have further terrorist attacks from Afghan soil.
We have the Return to School roadmap that has step-by-step direction on how to get this done. So it's all hands on deck. We do know vaccinations work. And in those communities where the vaccine numbers are higher, we're seeing more success. Unfortunately, in those places that they're using politics to block good practice, we're seeing hospitalizations through the roof for young children. That's unacceptable. We can control that. Let's get our kids back in school where they belong.
We have a new NBC News poll taken as Americans were witnessing this chaos in Kabul. Among all adults, Mr. Biden's approval rating stands at a fairly mediocre 49%. 48% disapproving in our polarized politics. That isn't the end of the world. But if you compare it to last April, When the numbers were 53% approve, 39% disapprove, you start to see some erosion. Now, not surprisingly, approval of Mr. Biden's handling of the situation in Afghanistan as we're watching all this is extremely low, just 25%. But the president's overall slippage is less about Afghanistan than about two other issues. Approval of his handling of the coronavirus is down a whopping 16 points, just 53% approved now from 69 in April. And approval of his handling of the economy is standing at 47%. That's upside down now because it was at 52.
All right, our thanks to Chuck Todd for that. Coming up, the search is on yet again for the late Alex Trebek's replacement on Jeopardy.
Yes, after executive producer Mike Richards abruptly quits as host. I'll tell you why next. This may sound familiar. Jeopardy is looking for a new host. Mike Richards stepped down as host Friday after a series of scandals surfaced that forced the quiz show to cancel production after just one day of taping the first episodes of the new season. Now, Richards will remain the show's executive producer, says Jeopardy is now going to bring back guest hosts so they can restart production as the search for a new permanent host resumes. This morning, a quiz show known for tough questions is facing perhaps the most challenging one yet. Who is the host? Now, guest hosts will once again step behind the famous Jeopardy lectern.
Our final category today is Shakespeare's plays.
It's unclear if that'll include fan favorite LeVar Burton, who's scoring endorsements on Twitter from the likes of Ryan Reynolds, Seth MacFarlane, and Leslie Jones. Burton himself sent this tweet: "Happy Friday, y'all," around the time news broke of Mike Richards' resignation. It's unclear if that was referring to the Jeopardy news. Another past fill-in, Ken Jennings, told the New York Times, "Jeopardy is one of the last pure things in a troubled age, and I hate that something pure like that has to be sullied by backstage drama."
It just made it feel like they didn't care about the people who watch the show, and that's absolutely the wrong message you want to send.
Richards was officially named Alex Trebek's replacement 2 weeks ago, a role immediately put in jeopardy amid a string of controversies. Culminated last week with a bombshell report by The Ringer. Reporter Claire McNear unearthed Richards' old podcast, The Random Show, recorded in 2013 and 14. According to The Ringer, he made several disparaging remarks about people with mental disabilities, Jewish people, and sexist jokes about women's bodies.
Everyone's going to wear one pieces and look really frumpy and overweight.
The backlash was swift. And by Friday, in a note to Jeopardy staff, Richards stepped down, saying it has become clear that moving forward as host would be too much of a distraction for our fans and not the right move for the show. Sony Pictures Television said, "We support Mike's decision to step down," adding the studio was surprised to learn about Richards' podcast and the offensive language he used in the past. We've spoken with him about our concerns and our expectations moving forward. A Sony spokesperson says 5 episodes were filmed with Richards as host. Those shows will air in September. We can expect more details about the next round of guest hosts this week. By the way, we should note that Happy Friday, y'all tweet from LeVar Burton. He actually does do that many Fridays, so we don't think that had anything to do with Jeopardy. Just the timing made people go, interesting.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of that made people go,
And will for some time.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there.
That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.